Snow fell endlessly across the jagged peaks of the Alps, swallowing all sound. The monastery rose from the white abyss like a fossil of faith, its bell tower frozen mid-song beneath the sky's pale glow. Inside, the air was thick with incense and centuries of breath. Every wall seemed to hum with memories of prayers long forgotten, their echoes trapped in the frozen stone. A procession of monks moved slowly through the halls, robes whispering like dry leaves. Their faces were hidden, their silence absolute, as though sound itself had been exiled. Father Lucien arrived at dusk, his horse collapsing in the snow behind him. He stared at the towering gates, unsure whether he'd come seeking God or something far older. The prior greeted him with a nod, his lips barely moving. "Welcome, Father," he murmured, voice rough as gravel. "Here, silence is our only prayer." Candles lined the corridor, each flame trembling in the draught. Lucien followed, his boots echoing too loudly, the sound swallowed almost instantly by the ancient stone. That night, during supper, the monks sat like statues. The only sounds were spoons against bowls and the faint whine of wind seeping through the shutters. Lucien bowed his head to pray, but felt something wrong in the air, a pressure, a weight. When he looked up, every monk was already staring at him, unmoving. Later, in his small chamber, he tried to write in his journal. The ink froze before it touched the page, and the silence felt alive, listening, breathing, waiting. A bell tolled faintly outside, distant, hollow, impossibly far away. He froze in place, realizing with dread that no one had rung it for years. The next morning arrived pale and colorless, the sun a faint blur behind the clouds. In the courtyard, a monk was missing, his bed untouched, his candle still burning beside a folded robe. The prior announced no search, no prayer for the missing. His voice trembled as he said, "The silence will keep him." The others bowed their heads as if accepting a sentence. Lucien wandered the corridors, his footsteps echoing where they shouldn't. The monastery felt alive, breathing, watching, hiding something behind its frozen walls. He found the library sealed shut, the door wrapped in iron chains. On the wood carved deep and uneven were Latin words he couldn't translate, silentium redimit peccata. That night, the wind howled like a living creature, clawing at the monastery's stone. Lucien dreamed of bells ringing under the snow, each toll shaking his bones. He woke to find frost creeping across the floor of his room, forming symbols he'd seen in old manuscripts. They pulsed faintly, like veins under pale skin. In the refectory, the monks sat motionless, eyes downcast. When Lucien entered, their gazes turned to him all at once, cold, unblinking, unified. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked the air like a sin. The nearest monk flinched, clutching his throat as if the sound had burned him. The prior stood slowly, eyes clouded with dread. "Father Lucien," he whispered, "you must not break the vow. The silence binds what sleeps below." Confused and afraid, Lucien followed the prior into the chapel. Candlelight flickered weakly, casting restless shadows that seemed to whisper without breath. They stopped before the altar, its surface carved with saints whose faces were scratched away. Beneath it, a staircase spiraled into darkness. The prior handed Lucien a lantern, his fingers trembling. "Do not speak, do not pray. Only listen," he said, then stepped aside, refusing to follow him down. Lucien descended, the sound of his heartbeat louder than his footsteps. The air grew thick, damp, and impossibly old, a place untouched by centuries of light. At the bottom, he found a locked gate. Behind it, rows of skulls lined the walls, monks with lips sewn shut, their hollow eyes still staring toward the altar above. On a stone pedestal sat a small wooden chest covered in frost. Its hinges were black with age, its seal unbroken, as if waiting for his touch. He reached out, hesitating only for a moment. The instant his fingers touched the lid, the candles upstairs blew out one by one. A rumble echoed through the monastery, low, guttural, alive. Lucien lifted the chest, and the air turned heavy with whispers. He opened it carefully. Inside was a small, ancient manuscript, its pages yellowed and fragile, the ink faded to a deep brown. As he turned the first page, the candlelight dimmed. Words, written centuries ago, seemed to awaken, crawling across the parchment like veins of shadow. "To bind the voice," he read aloud, "is to bind the soul." His own breath caught as the walls around him seemed to pulse with invisible life. The room grew colder, the flame shrinking to a fragile blue spark. Lucien's breath crystallized in the air, suspended like dust in holy light that no longer felt divine. He turned another page, though his fingers trembled. The ink shimmered faintly, rearranging itself into new words, words that hadn't been written before. "Silence is the bridge between the living and the damned." The letters bled across the parchment like a wound reopening after centuries of stillness. Lucien dropped the book, heart pounding. The manuscript landed open on the floor, its pages turning by themselves, as if caught in a wind that wasn't there. He heard voices now, hundreds of them, whispering through the stone. Some prayed, some wept, and others simply called his name in a language not meant for the living. He stumbled backward, clutching the lantern to his chest. The light flickered madly, throwing long skeletal shadows across the walls of skulls. From above, the bells began to ring slowly, heavily, as if dragged from the grave. Dust rained down from the ceiling with each toll. He froze, gripping the manuscript tight. The sound wasn't coming from outside, it came from within the walls themselves. A terrible realization struck him. The bells weren't calling the faithful, they were warning them. The whispering grew louder, forming a chant that rolled through the crypt like thunder. Lucien tried to cover his ears, but the sound was inside his head. He dropped to his knees, shouting a prayer that dissolved into panic. "Deliver us, Lord." But the words were swallowed before they left his mouth. Something moved in the darkness ahead, a pale shape, shifting, gliding soundlessly between the pillars. The air grew dense with the scent of ash and cold iron. The shape drew closer, revealing a monk's robe, empty and weightless. Its hood lifted slightly, as though something unseen was breathing beneath it. Lucien backed away, clutching the crucifix around his neck. The figure stopped, its invisible gaze fixed on him. Then, a whisper escaped, his own voice echoed back to him. The lantern went out. The darkness swallowed everything. Only the tolling of the bells remained, pounding like a dying heart beneath the snow. He ran up the staircase, the cold chasing him like smoke. Each step echoed twice, once for him, and once for something following. At the top he burst into the chapel. The candles reignited all at once, flaring too bright, too fast, burning white instead of gold. The monks were there, standing motionless in rows. Their faces were expressionless, but their eyes hollow and wet, followed his every move. The prior stood before the altar, his hands clasped in prayer. "You read it aloud," he said, voice breaking. "Now the silence will claim us all." Lucien dropped the manuscript onto the altar. The bells tolled again, this time so loud the stone itself seemed to cry out. He covered his ears, but the sound bled into his soul. The storm outside roared like an angry sea, hammering against the chapel windows. Lightning flashed, revealing faces pressed against the glass, faces that weren't there a heartbeat ago. The monks fell to their knees, hands covering their ears, but their mouths began to move silently in prayer. Lucien's heart pounded so loud he could barely breathe. The prior raised his arms toward the ceiling, shouting over the bells. The vow was never meant for God, it was meant to keep him out. His voice cracked as blood trickled from his ears. Lucien stumbled backward, the manuscript now glowing faintly on the altar. Its pages turned faster and faster, whispering in dozens of voices. The wind burst through the chapel doors, scattering candles and hymnal pages. Snow poured inside, and with it came a smell of old graves and burned incense. The crucifix above the altar twisted on its chain, the figure of Christ cracking at the spine. The bells outside rang faster now, 12, 13, 14 times. Then all at once, Lucien covered his face, shouting prayers that vanished into the chaos. He could feel the vibration of the bells deep in his chest, like a second heartbeat trying to take over. The prior's body lifted from the floor, robes fluttering as if underwater. His eyes rolled back white, and when his lips parted, no voice came, only the sound of the bells. The walls shook violently, dust raining down from the vaulted ceiling. Candles exploded, sparks flying like dying stars in the dark. Lucien grabbed the manuscript and fled the chapel, snow and fire swirling in his wake. The corridors screamed as if the stones themselves were alive. He ran toward the bell tower, the sound guiding him deep, rhythmic, impossible to escape. The air grew colder the higher he climbed, each breath cutting like glass. Halfway up, he stumbled and fell to his knees. For a moment, he thought he saw footprints in the frost beside him, fresh, bare, and not his own. When he looked up, ghostly figures appeared on the stairs above, monks without faces, their robes drifting like mist. They were moving downward, toward him. Lucien forced himself upward, clutching the manuscript to his chest. "Forgive me," he whispered, unsure whether he meant it for God or the dead. He reached the tower door and slammed it shut behind him. The bells loomed overhead, enormous, trembling, swinging with unseen strength. The manuscript pulsed in his hands, words crawling across the pages faster than he could read. Each sentence began and ended with his name. He looked up, and through the lightning flashes, he saw them, dozens of monks hanging in the rafters, their bodies suspended by bell ropes. Eyes open, mouths sewn. Lucien screamed, but no sound came. The silence around him swallowed every breath, every thought, until even his heartbeat felt distant. He dropped the manuscript, and it burst into flame before hitting the ground. The fire spread, licking the wooden beams and ropes that held the bells. The bells swung wildly now, ringing in violent harmony as the tower burned. Snow and embers swirled together in the wind, red and white like blood on marble. Lucien stumbled through the smoke-filled tower, coughing violently. The air was thick with ash and whispers, words that sounded like prayers, but were not. He grabbed the nearest rope, trying to stop the bells from moving. The coarse fibers cut into his hands, blood dripping onto the frozen wood below. "Stop!" he shouted, though no sound left his lips. His voice was gone, stolen by the same silence that had devoured the monks. The flames climbed higher, painting the walls orange and gold. Shadows of the dead monks danced in the light, moving in rhythm with the tolling bells. Lucien fell to his knees, clutching the burning manuscript. It glowed brighter now, pulsing like a living heart, as if it wanted to be read one last time. He opened it through the fire, pages curling and turning to ash beneath his fingers. "Deliver them," he tried to whisper. "Deliver us all." The bells rang louder, every toll echoing with pain and fury. The tower trembled, stones cracking, beams splintering under the weight of centuries of silence breaking. Outside, the storm screamed across the mountains, as if nature itself wanted to drown out the sound of what was happening within. Through the flames, Lucien saw the faces of the monks, pale, translucent, rising slowly toward the ceiling like smoke. Their sewn lips moved as one, whispering wordless prayers. He stood, trembling, the crucifix around his neck glowing faintly in the firelight. He raised it high, as though to bless the flames themselves. The manuscript fell from his hands, disintegrating in midair. A shockwave of silence burst outward, sudden, absolute, final. The bells stopped. For the first time in centuries, the monastery fell still. The silence that followed was so deep, Lucien thought it might never end. He collapsed to the floor, gasping for air that would not come. His body trembled as if resisting something unseen, his lips forming words that no longer existed. Outside, the storm began to fade. The snow thickened, soft and heavy, covering the monastery in a white, eternal shroud. In the courtyard below, the remaining monks stood frozen where they had prayed. Their robes fluttered faintly in the wind, but their bodies no longer moved. The flames in the tower dimmed to embers, glowing like dying stars. Lucien crawled toward the window, reaching for the open sky. He could see dawn breaking faint light bleeding over the mountaintops, turning the snow a ghostly gold. For a moment, everything was beautiful. Lucien pressed his hand to the glass. Frost formed beneath his fingers, spreading quickly, sealing the window shut. He exhaled once, and his breath froze midair. He looked toward the altar one last time. The crucifix had melted into the stone, its form distorted, its shadow long and still. He smiled faintly, whispering without sound, "It is done." As the final bell cracked and fell from the tower, the monastery collapsed into silence. The snow buried its ruins within hours, leaving no trace, only stillness and the echo of something that once prayed. Morning came without warmth. The sky hung low and white, pressing down on the mountains like a heavy veil. The storm was gone, but its silence lingered. Snow covered everything, the tower, the chapel, the courtyard. Only the cross at the highest peak remained visible, a lonely symbol half buried in frost. Inside the chapel, the air was still. The pews were coated in a thin layer of snow that had drifted in through shattered windows. Every candle was long dead. Father Lucien lay near the altar, his hands clasped over his chest. His eyes were closed, his face peaceful, as if prayer had finally brought him home. Light broke through the stained glass, scattering faint colors across the frozen floor. For a moment, the entire chapel shimmered like a cathedral made of ice. The wind outside began to move again, brushing against the old stone walls. It carried with it a sound, faint, distant, and familiar. Down in the village below, a shepherd stopped mid-step. He lifted his head toward the mountains, eyes wide. In the distance, he heard the bells ring once more. The sound rolled through the valley, long, slow, and mournful. It was not a call to prayer, but a memory, echoing through snow and time. The shepherd crossed himself, whispering the bells. They ring again. His breath turned to mist as he stared at the silent white peaks above. Far above, the monastery lay buried beneath the endless snow. No movement, no sound, only the ghost of a bell tolling beneath the ice, forever marking the end of silence itself.